Question. Should we raise the speed limits on BC's highways? Well, the BC government is asking that very question at a public open house in Vancouver this evening. Mike Lorimer is heading up the review for the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. He says among the things up for discussion is pushing the speed limit above 110 kilometers an hour on certain stretches.
You've got improvements in vehicle technology. You've got improvements in roadways. We've done over $14 billion of investment on the provincial highway network in the last decade. So, we've got safe roads, and I guess the question is, nothing's predetermined at this point. We are basing it on the public input and the technical data.
Our next guest will be at tonight's open house, arguing that the BC government should, in fact, increase speed limits on highways. Ian Tootill is the co-founder of Sense BC, a driver's advocacy group that supports safety through education, not speed enforcement. And he joined us here in Studio 10. Ian, good morning and welcome.
Morning, Rick.
So why should we raise the speed limits on BC highways?
Well, we should be looking at raising speed limits primarily so that we don't make scofflaws out of the majority of motorists. People tend to drive at a speed that they feel comfortable with for a number of different reasons, including the design speed of the roads, the condition of their vehicle, their driving ability, noise in the vehicle, fuel economy, a whole raft of reasons. And the limits that we have in British Columbia don't represent reality in the 21st century, and we think that they should.
We're taught time and again when we're learning to drive that speed kills. The faster you drive, the more serious the accident can be. How do you argue with that?
Well, first of all, speed doesn't kill. Hitting something stationary or hitting something going much slower is what kills. And what you try and do is avoid that. So what we focus on more is crash avoidance. And what the government has been focusing on up until now is crash mitigation. And we think that the focus should be more on trying to train better drivers and creating an overall driving consciousness in British Columbia that hasn't been around because it's not been led for a good several decades now.
So what's the number? Where would you like to see speed limits?
Well, that's not up to me to determine. I've said time and time again I won't get pinned in terms of what I think an actual number should be on a given highway. There's a methodology that should be used to determine highway speed limits. And although I will be attending this open house later today, and we're pleased that there is this opportunity for public input, we don't think public input at an open house is the way to determine what speed limit should be on BC highways. There's a methodology to be used, and it's quite simple. It's given by the Institute for Transportation Engineers, and it's very simply that you measure the free flow of traffic over a long period of time, and you determine the upper end of safe travel speed by 85% of the drivers. And the principle behind it is that the drivers are the best people to know, or in the best position to know, what the correct travel speed should be.
I believe now most of our highways are 90 to 100 kilometers an hour. I think the Coquihalla is 110. If you look in the province of Alberta, a lot of their highways are 110. They also have different speeds for cars and trucks. Would you support that, where trucks are about 10 kilometers an hour slower?
I don't think it's necessary to legislate top speeds for trucks. I mean, they pretty much do a good job of that themselves. Some of them have governors on their trucks that are put on by the companies that run the trucks. And a lot of drivers decide not to do over a certain speed because of fuel consumption, that type of thing. Plus, I don't think it's practical when many of the highways in British Columbia are simply two-lane highways going in a certain direction. It just doesn't make any sense to do that, and it's expensive.
How about minimum speeds? Would you support that?
It's not necessary. I mean, it's really, I guess if you have a multi-lane highway, people can go any speed they want as long as they have some lane discipline. That's another issue that we have in British Columbia, is that people up until now, and it's getting better lately because we have changed the signage in the last few years, and I've noticed a big improvement, but we could still do a lot to enforce some lane discipline in BC so that the slower drivers do stay right and that the faster drivers can expect to pass on the left.
Is there a risk that the higher we set the limits, people will push their speeds higher and beyond what they can handle?
That is a fair assumption that comes up quite a bit. And it's not entirely true. It can be true if the limits aren't set properly. If you set speed limits properly, you will not get noncompliance. There are many states, 39 of the 50 states in the U.S., since the federally mandated 55 has come off in 1996. 39 of the 50 states have raised their speed limits, and for the most part, they found that their compliance has gone up and their noncompliance has gone way down. people, your assertion is based on an assumption that people choose a travel speed based on the posted speed limit, which they don't. I go back to the earlier statement, which is they choose their travel speeds based on a number of different factors. In Germany, on the autobahns where they have no speed limits, there are people that are able to do whatever speeds they want to do, but for the most part, people tend to travel on those roads at 130 to 140.
We spoke with pedestrian advocate Bev Ballantyne. Now, she actually agrees with you that speed limits could be raised on some highways, and the focus should shift now to unsafe drivers.
The issue about safety is about lack of enforcement and low penalties. There has to be more enforcement against bad driving and aggressive driving, and the penalties need to be higher. Drivers do what they do because they can.
So that's Bev Ballantyne putting pedestrians first. Now, Ian, how do you think unsafe driving should be enforced?
Well, first of all, that statement by Bev is a ridiculous statement. We have some of the harshest driving penalties in Canada. They're taking away vehicles now for doing 40K over on the highways. And I don't agree at all with what she's saying. Police have untold power now. They've never had this power before. They can seize your car on the spot and issue thousands of dollars in fines and penalties and impound fees. I really do believe that the majority of people want to behave safely on our roads. And I think given the opportunity to behave responsibly, coupled with some decent training, I think if we raise the bar in terms of driving expectations and encourage people to do the right things, I think people will do it. It's not that the enforcement's not necessary, because it is, but we have enforcement in British Columbia. Make no mistake about that. How
much appetite do you think there is for this?
Well, if you ask people, they will say that they don't have an appetite for it, and this is why I find that the speed review process is a little bit concerning. In the U.S., before they raised the speed limits, they did a number of polls and asked people, and people said no, they don't want it. And then after they raised them, they said, yeah, it was a good idea. It's very simple. If you go on the freeways in British Columbia and observe, and the ministry does observe these speeds, you will know that most people are going above the posted speed limit. The problem is when you ask people about speed limits, most people will say that they observe posted speed limits, but you haven't got them to define what the speed limit actually is. Most people don't actually agree that the speed limit is a speed limit. They have some arbitrary number above it that's based on what enforcement levels have been set at before. So they know they won't get caught at 120 in a 100 zone, so they say, well, I always do 120 and I never get caught, so I observe the speed limit.
I got to ask, how many tickets have you had in the past year?
Well, it's funny that you asked that. I just did a 7,000-kilometer trip to the U.S. where I traveled for the most part considerably above the posted speed limits in places and I won't admit to how fast I was going. In some of those places, I got a ticket outside of Las Vegas just not long ago, about a week and a half ago, and that's the first moving violation that I've had in quite some time. Other than that, when I was younger, I got my share of tickets, but I also spent a lot of time on the road.
How confident are you, Ian, that the process in Vancouver today will actually lead to the government changing the speed limits?
I think that the process that we're in right now will lead to an initial change on some highways. And I think that once this government and once people find out that the carnage that we've been told to expect for the last 2 decades doesn't occur, I think there will be more of an appetite for it, or I'm hopeful there will be. And I'm hopeful that we will start to adopt a driving culture. I like to use the tagline "driving with purpose." The Dutch right now have a tagline called "faster where possible, slower where necessary." And I think that these are great taglines. I think that we should be advocating transportation that's fast and efficient and safe. And I think that we should end the push-me-pull-you approach, or the suck-and-blow approach that I like to say that we have in BC, where you build expensive roads like the Sea to Sky Highway that cost almost $1 billion. You improve it and you keep the speed limit at 80. That makes no sense at all.
Except in some places. I'll take issue with that.
Right.
It can be a very dangerous highway where if you're going too fast, you can.
Absolutely. But you can have speed advisories for those. And if you put those in the appropriate areas, then and people know that they're there for a reason, they will pay attention to the signs. Right now, they don't pay attention to the signs.
Ian Tootill, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Rick. It's nice to be here and to meet you finally.
Thanks for coming in. Ian Tootill, co-founder of Sense BC, a driver's advocacy group. Now, the BC government is holding a public open house about road safety and speed limits this evening here in Vancouver. It's happening between 5 and 8 p.m. at the SFU Siegel Centre at 500 Granville Street. So what do you think? Should the speed limit be raised on some BC highways, and if so, which ones? Do speed limits affect your driving behavior, or do you stick to what you feel is safe? And Ian brought up a good point. If the posted limit is 110 and you figure you're not going to get caught if you're doing 115 to 120, is that the speed you travel? You can let us know on TalkBack at 604-662-6690 or email us earlyed@cbc.ca, or you can join the conversation right now on Twitter by searching for us at CBC Early Edition.